Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson, and so glad you were able to join us today. Today, we're going to talk about a brand new program at America Cornerstone called Executive Branch for America, fondly known as EBA. And we have our wonderful guest, David Brat, with us today. He's a former congressman, an economist. He's the dean of the business school at Liberty University, among many other things. So, Dave, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be with you, Dr. Carson. Thank you.
And, before we jump into executive branch, let's talk a little bit about the legislative branch.
Mm,
Because,
Good.
you had a very successful career at Arthur Anderson and the World Bank and also in academia. And then you decided that you would actually run for elected office and famously defeated Eric Cantor, the minority leader of the House at that time. I mean, that was quite an endeavor. Now, what made you decide to run?
The long answer is probably God, but that would take a long time to explain. But I did business, and then I went to Princeton Seminary, and then I worked at the World Bank and got interested in helping the world and poverty, and then did my PhD in economics as a way to go solve that. I
Hmm.
worked in the God box, 30 groups across in the Supreme Court, all the Presbys and Episcopals and Jewish and Quakers and everybody. And back then, they were all nice liberals. There was no the Marxist thing was a little light back then, and so they all meant well, but just didn't have the policy stuff. So I wanted to. I thought that was my calling. I still do.
Well, coming into Congress as a non-career politician, uh, you served for 5 years representing the 7th District in Virginia. Um, what were your impressions when you first got to Congress, and were there things that surprised you?
Yeah, I was shocked. The first day I showed up, I came in a few weeks early, and we voted on the budget. And everybody said, "Whatever you do, don't vote last." Well, I was so mesmerized with all the deals going on around me. I was the last to vote. It was like 212 to 212 or something at the time. And I hadn't voted. And so Boehner's young guy came up and said, "Hey, Boehner wants to see you in the back." And I said, "Well, you tell Boehner I love him and I respect him, but there's no way I'm going in that back room right now because it's my first day on the floor." So my Freedom Caucus buddies were just dying laughing. They thought this was the funniest thing. But then I saw all sorts of deals, right? They keep the entire budget of the United States, the whole process open until they get what they want. They go horse trade, and
Right.
then I just saw more and more of that the big money, and now we're 50 trillion in debt in 10 years, according to CBO. So that's what I saw. I was expecting to see it, but you learn it in deeper and deeper ways, and you see how it's enmeshed in the
Absolutely.
system, right?
Well, it must have been particularly distressing for you as an economist. You're a PhD economist. I'm not sure there are any other people with that kind of credential in Congress, but
Yeah, well, it was distressing with my PhD hat, but with my Calvinist hat on, it was expected. So there's
well, the economists, they love to say that there's natural cycle to the economy,
yeah,
sort of like a sine wave up and down.
yeah.
Uh, is that really true, or is it that we have people who know what they're doing, and then we have people who don't know what they're doing?
Well, both are true. There is kind of a natural business cycle. Unfortunately, now the last couple cycles have been caused by the Federal Reserve Bank, right? John Taylor out at Stanford, he followed Milton Friedman. He's the best guy on monetary policy in the country. And he's shown that, without doubt in the highest journals, they printed too much money in '04 and '05, and that caused the '07, '08 crisis. Now we kept the federal funds rate at zero for a decade. That caused the current crisis
Right.
and the everything bubble we're in. So that is, and the trick there is that's not the real economy, right? The real economy is people going to work every day, making stuff, uh, education, human capital, technology, innovation. That's real. Uh,
Mhm.
Unfortunately, on the news now, everything's about the financialization of the economy, stocks and bonds, and the wealthy getting wealthier. Well, the average American can't figure out what's going on. So, the latest business cycles have been man made in a way that's not good.
Right. Well, Biden's proposed budget of 6.9 trillion.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, we're starting to get used to that word, but a trillion?
right,
I mean, if you
right.
tried to count one number per second, it would take you 53,000 years to count to a
It's amazing. It's
trillion.
amazing, right?
It's an amazing number, but he says that his budget is going to reduce the deficit. The Congressional Budget Office obviously doesn't agree.
Yeah.
But what happens if Congress fails to come to an agreement on a debt ceiling? And what does it mean for the ordinary American?
Well, if I don't think that'll happen. They no one wants the bad headlines. But if it did happen, then you'd have a prioritization of all the spending
Mm,
in order. So Medicare and Social Security would be saved, and the absolutely essential core government services would come first, and then there'd just be cuts in descending order. But more likely they're going to work out some deal at the last minute. That's always the way it works, and it won't be a good deal right now. Right, we'll be 50 trillion in debt in 10 years, according to that CBO, and the deficit's 2 trillion a year over the next 10. And even the Republicans are now, i- the rhetoric is fairly interesting. We just got to get back to the good old days of 2019, when the deficit was only
right.
1.2 trillion. And you're just like going, wow, no one thinks it's real. You're passing this on to the young people
Right.
for real. And if you just do 5% the interest payment now on 50 trillion, that's 2.5 trillion per year in interest payments, which is 3 times the defense budget. And so in that, you're just throwing money in the wind, right? The young people are being forced to pay all this. It's a disaster.
It basically will become the government's number one financial
Right.
obligation,
Absolutely. Yep.
which is well, what's the ultimate consequences to us? I mean, there's some, particularly on the left, who say, just print more money.
Yeah.
What is it that they're missing? What don't they understand about that?
Well, that is the new thing. That's what they said, print more money, and they had this new modern monetary theory on the left. So they tried it, and now the only thing that's forcing the Fed to finally get it right is they created inflation.
Mhm.
Before that, no one cared about the debt,
Right,
right? If you're paying off the debt at 0% interest rates, well, whatever.
right.
Let's just keep the party going. But now, as I just said, now the Fed funds rate's going up to about 5, and it may go up a hair more. But now there's huge consequences, and for the everyday person, if you don't, the simplest, I hate this will take 1 minute,
Mhm.
right? But modern economic growth, which started at about 1776, had one cause, and it wasn't technology. It wasn't having geniuses around. It
Mhm.
wasn't trade. We've had all of those through all human history, right? The new and we've always had markets, and we've always had banking. The new thing was, as a society, we chose the free market system. So we chose that system, and it has given us just an abundance
Yeah,
beyond comprehension. And so, what's really at stake? You lose the free market system. You start, all of human history was run by pharaohs and despots and dictators, and
right.
everybody made $1,000 a year, no matter where you live, 1,000 bucks until 1776, roughly speaking. And then we got rich. And so, what's at stake? Just that, just the entire trajectory of the Judeo Christian West is at stake for real.
And you know, COVID obviously wreaked havoc on our economy, and is going to be blamed probably for the next century for anything that goes wrong.
Right, right, right.
But obviously, there are other things. What, as an economist, is the impact of all the handouts, all the money that we've been giving to people?
Yeah, well, I think you're seeing it every day now in the financial news. And for the people that don't follow the financial news, you've got to do that, right? There's some good.
Mhm.
Go out to FinBiz. It's a nice, you can see the whole market in one picture. And then just read. I tell my students, just read the left hand side of the Wall Street Journal. It's free. You can read the front page for free of
That's true.
any of the financial papers. Just if you just read the headlines, you'll get smart over the course of a year. But the consequences is it's like going to war, right? GDP does go up when you go to war.
Mhm.
You spend a lot more money when you go to war, but it's all misplaced. It's nothing that makes you happier that you're investing in, right? You're blowing up shells and bombs and
Right.
tanks and killing people, and it's just a total waste of resources that could have gone to help the young kids in poverty, in K to 12 education to become smarter, become a doctor like you. And so it's just what's at stake is a total misallocation, just spending on the wrong things. And it's hard to teach that because it's kind of what if analysis, right? What
Right.
if we wouldn't have been making all these terrible mistakes? How
Sure.
could life be better? And it's hard. You got to have that imagination
Well,
ready to go.
speaking of war,
Yeah.
um, China's sort of doing some saber rattling and sort
Yep.
of testing what's going on with us. Uh, do you think China's going to replace us as the world power? And if it does, what does that mean for us?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to. I watch a few people. One is a demographer named Peter Zehan. He's been out at Rand and preaching the demographic revolution going on in China. In a decade, it's a disaster. In 20 to
Mm.
20, 30 years, they probably have a half of their population go from 1.4 billion to 7 or 800 million. And then they've got their debt is 300% of GDP. Ours is 100%, and we're in bad shape.
Right.
And they have bubbles, and they have kind of tried to cheat the free market system. They through government investment they've created you know high rises and bullet trains and all that. And the first few you build, they're productive, and they help productivity. But there's those are the cheap, easy investments. Then it gets harder to pick the next winner. And so I think we're in trouble the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see them probably surpass us in size. But Xi Jinping just gave his 20th party remarks about a month ago, and they went full on Marxist Leninism. He rejected Chinese Buddhist peace and harmony language altogether. They got rid of their market reforms guy, and they went to a war footing language instead of partnering, etc. So I think that show they know they're going internal. They know the U.S. is going to end up decoupling, maybe just out of pragmatism. For the first time, our CEOs have been remarkably woke
Yeah.
over the past decade or so, and out of their own self-interest, right? They didn't seem to care much about the country's interests over the last decade, but now, in order for their own profit max over the long term, they're probably going to start looking at India and
Right.
some of the other Asian countries, etc.
Well, for our audience that isn't sophisticated in economics, uh, what would be the consequences to us if the dollar is no longer the reserve currency and China takes over?
Yeah, it would be. We've been getting a free ride, right? So the Federal Reserve System in this country has printed $9 trillion that they hold on in their bank, in the reserves, and that's like giving us a sugar high to get us through COVID. And then along they've accommodated the government spending, like you just said, the $7 trillion
Right.
just in the past year or so, one budget. And so the effect, if you really did lose the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency, and there's moves in that way. We're going to lose the petrodollar, but I've looked it up. and that's not a significant chunk. So if you lost it, it would be devastating. We would, and it's very interesting. As a conservative, I'm torn a little bit because we set up the post World War II order, right? This Bretton Woods liberal order,
Right.
and now it's got too expensive, so we're coming back. Well, that's kind of why we got to have the global reserve currency because we made that deal. We will be the peacekeeper, and we'll try to have a rules based order. And I like that as long as everyone shares in, but the rest of the world quit sharing. And so now we're in tougher space. And so I don't think we're going to lose the currency because if you just look where you're going to invest, right?
Right.
So the US is down, but everyone else is worse by far. Would you risk your money in savings accounts in China for 5 or 10 years? I wouldn't. Would you put your
Yeah,
money in Saudi? India, maybe, right? Maybe they seem to be fairly stable. But some of those BRIC countries, I'm like Russia, no, 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 no. So we're weakening, and it's true. We're becoming weaker, but it's relative to folks who don't know how to run a shop at all.
and we do have an advantage in the sense that China's economy is largely dependent on ours.
Yes,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not to their advantage for us to crash.
right.
At
Yeah,
least
that's right.
at least not yet.
Right, right. That's right, right, right. Yeah,
They're
there.
if they
Yep,
get to too powerful a position and they have what they need, I don't think they'll care two bits what happens
yep,
to us. So,
yep. Yeah, I think Bush. I think one of the Bushes talked with one of the heads of China. I can't remember 10 or 20 years ago. They said, "What's your worst fear?" And the Chinese leader said, "Feeding 1.4 billion people." Right? So they because it's not only about human welfare, which you would hope it would be, it's about their own preservation. And they
absolutely,
know if they don't feed the people, they're in
absolutely.
trouble.
Well, we're gonna have to take a short break, and we'll be right back with our fascinating guest, Dr. Dave Brat. And we're back with common sense. You know, as I've said many times, common sense is no longer common, particularly in Washington, D.C. But, we've got to do everything we can as individuals, all of whom have spheres of influence, to bring common sense back and just to start talking about things that make sense once again. Now, one thing I want to ask you, Dave, is about the state of education
Yeah,
in the U.S. today. You know, we get kids who can't read, they can't do basic math. There was a survey about 3 or 4 weeks that came out that they looked at 23 public schools in Baltimore to see how many kids were achieving at grade level in math. Thousands of kids looked at, zero, not a single one. I mean, this is really a serious problem. And the state of education seems dismal. What do you think, um, as an educator and as an administrator, can be done, if anything, or is it just a downward cycle? Because there was a time when we had a fantastic educational system. When Alexis de Tocqueville came here, he was blown away.
yeah.
Average people, a mountain man he could find. The guy could read. The guy could tell him about the Declaration of Independence. What the heck has happened to us?
Yeah, well, that's a deep, deep story for folks who want to get inspired. And I always recommend The Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom. It's one of my favorite. It's an indictment of the higher education system in particular, but it signals what we've lost. For Bloom, he's a Platonist, and so I differ with him on some of the points.
Mm,
But for me, and it's become a slogan. It's not good. We kick God out of the schools, and in the '60s, '70s, et cetera, over diversity, and we forget that God is the author and creator of that diversity. And so when you talk about your common sense, right? When you
right,
kick God out of the schools, it's way more than God, right? God's not some ephemeral thing. He's a person. And just even the secular humanist literature, God is always kind of the truth, the true, the beautiful, and the good. And if you look at K to 12 systems and what's gone wrong, Or if you look at a Marxist system, the Marxist is the antithesis of the Judeo-Christian West. And so they, of course, don't believe in God, but it's more than that. They've also gotten rid of the truth, and this is at a deep philosophical level, right? They don't even pursue truth.
Right.
They think it's part of the superstructure
To
created
them,
by the
it's
elites.
all about indoctrination
Right,
because,
right. Yep,
Lenin said, "Give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be
yep,
uprooted." It's
yep,
all about indoctrination.
yep. That's it. It's and so if you get rid of the truth and the beautiful. Think about that for a minute, right? Our modern art, the beauty around us, growing up, the beauty of the soul, all that whole dimension of what is beautiful, and then of course the good, uh, ethics, right? And I don't even like the modern business ethics. It's pretty narrow. But the
Mhm.
life of the mind and reason, we've lost reason with a big R, and now it's all just narrow rationality, and everybody specializes.
Right.
And we've lost that entire world, which is inspiring. And if you don't inspire the kids, and the first, why am I going to sit there and do my times tables and learn how to write and all? What you got to be excited. And if you take God, for me, is the ultimate excitement, right? That
Mhm.
the first principles. That's why you get up in the morning. That's what gives you your purpose on the earth. And if you don't have that, then educate. And you say, so what can we do about it? Well, I would recommend you get out the Bible and get your family getting back into the Word and
Amen.
see if that if it makes your family a little more vibrant, your kids a little more vibrant. I think it will. I think it will.
Yeah, well, before 1963, almost all public schools had the Ten Commandments hanging up on
Yeah.
the wall,
Yeah.
and then it had to go. But when I ask people on the left exactly what is wrong with "Thou shalt not kill," and "Thou shalt not steal," and "Thou shalt not commit adultery," and "Thou shalt not envy," and all these things, and "honor your parents," and they never have a good answer for that
Mm.
because
Yep.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Yep.
And as we've divorced ourselves from our values, has our trajectory as a nation been upward or downward? I think
Yep.
it's pretty obvious that it's been downward.
Yep.
And, we have a lot to be proud of in this country. There are those who try to demonize us to say this is a horrible place based on slavery and all this garbage. The fact of the matter is, this was a ragtag bunch of militiamen
Mm.
who rose to the pinnacle of the world in record time. That was
Yep.
not an accident. It
No.
was because of the values that we manifested and the
Yep.
things that we taught our children. And it was the can do attitude, not the what can you do for me attitude. And do you think it's too late to get it back?
No, I don't think so. There's still a reservoir. Boy, if you read the Wall Street Journal though a day ago, 2 days ago, they
That was
reported
pretty
on the
discouraging, wasn't
yes,
it?
man, the status of religiosity is down in the 30s, and patriotism is in the 30s overall. Part of that, in our depths, the interesting thing about the left and even the Marxist folks is their ultimate morality is the Judeo-Christian morality. When they go to judge, right? When Marx is judging the rich versus the poor, he sounds like an Old Testament prophet in some sense, right? But then they convinced us to go in this scientific socialism, where the only thing that matters, the only thing you have knowledge of is the sense perceptions, going back to David Hume and whatever. And then the logical positivists and Bertrand Russell and all these guys, they tried to get rid of God intellectually. They ended up getting rid of science formally in philosophy because you've never seen a science. If you've seen one, let me know what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like.
Right.
So that's why I said we got to get back to R, the big capital R, reason. The Jewish rabbinic tradition, which goes back thousands of years, would laugh at this modern narrow rationality, right? They've had a reasoned discourse with the Word of God that precedes Plato and Socrates,
Mhm.
etc. And I think Christians got to get their confidence back in having that conversation. You get to replace my argument when you have a better one. You
Right.
don't get to tell me I have to get rid of my argument. My argument holds until you replace it with something better. And that's true science, right? You got to have a better mousetrap.
Well, none of that was thought about during the whole COVID
Yeah.
argument. when they kept saying, "Let's follow the science."
Right, right.
But, what science are they following?
Yeah,
Because, just you take something like natural immunity. Now, the scientific community has known about natural immunity, since the Civil War and smallpox, and, now all of a sudden, natural immunity? What's that? No, no. Until only recently have they
yep,
acknowledged that it's at least as good as the induced immunity,
yep,
probably better and
yep,
much more effective. That is total disregard of science.
yeah,
You take something like the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Things move toward a state of disorganization, and yet you want to say there was just this spontaneous Big Bang and everything came into perfect order
right,
to the
right,
extent
right,
that we can predict 70 years hence when a comet is coming.
yep,
Give me a break, you know?
right,
I don't know how they say that this is science.
yep,
And then
yep,
how do you get something as sophisticated as the human brain through natural selection? Because there's so many parts of it that interconnect that have no function if the other parts aren't there.
yep.
So, according to natural selection, those things would not continue to exist. They would disappear. So, they're obviously not following their own science. And when I've confronted some even PhD, even Nobel Prize winning scientists,
Yep.
uh, they just say, "Well, we don't understand everything." And I say, "I don't think you understand anything." Well, we're going to be right back with our fascinating guest, Dr. David Brat. And we're back with Common Sense with Dr. David Brat. There's the new program, Executive Branch for America. I know some of the students at Liberty have engaged in it, completely free of charge, and really helps people to understand the executive branch, the rulemaking, the staffing, the laws, the interactions. Because a lot of times when people particularly go in and staff positions, they're like deer caught in the headlights. They have no idea what's going on. It takes months or even a year to get acclimated to what's going on. Sometimes by the time you get acclimated, now you're starting to be ushered out. So we came up with this mechanism to present to people. What do you think of it, and what have you heard?
Well, I applaud the foresight and the imagination you showed in conceiving the entire project, which is the most important thing, is why choose the executive branch to study? If you're gonna spend your time and resources doing something, why'd you choose that? Probably because it's one of the most needed things on the planet right now. If you look at why we're at war right now,
Hmm.
without a war declaration, it's because the executive has the power, they say, to do that. If you look at the Federal Reserve government printing the money, going beyond their mandates, the FDIC saying we're going to bail out all depositors in the world, which is not in the law.
Right.
That's the executive branch just taking powers that haven't been given to them. And I could go on and on and on with the powers that the Congress has just voluntarily given the executive because we didn't want to vote on it. We were chicken.
Right.
And so, first off, it's hugely important for the young people to get their heads around that project and what it means studying the executive. And then, secondly, the implementation of it. My kids are way more computer savvy than me. My students at Liberty University, right? And so I said, hey, you guys, take a peek at this thing and let me know when you get done with the certificate and etc. And just bam, 10 of them are done in no time. 30 of them are done in a little. And they just said it was great. We learned a lot. We went through it. It was easy to do. And so hats off on the implementation part too, because everybody knows it's a pain to save 12 passwords and log
Right.
into 40 different things. And this thing was seamless. And
Oh
so
my
it's an
goodness.
important thing to study, and it's easy to study. And then you can, on a self interest, I'm an economist, and so you can put it on your resume That's a big deal. You get a certificate from the CPI and Ben Carson, and you put that brand name, and that means something because it sends a signal as to who you're hanging out with. And if
Yeah.
you're hanging out with Dr. Ben Carson, you're in some good space.
Unless you're very liberal. Even then, I do talk and deal with a lot of liberal people. And in a sense, I feel sorry for a lot of people who were traditional Democrats
Yeah,
because the Democratic Party has changed so much.
yeah,
I was a Democrat for a long time, um, but you don't even recognize the party anymore.
no,
And it kind of leaves a lot of people in limbo because, they love America and they're patriots and they care about the environment and they care about other
yep,
people, but
yep,
they're sort of like being dragged to this far extent.
yep,
And the same thing happens on the right side. You get people who sort of try to drag everyone way over here with all these litmus tests and stuff. And whatever happened to just, love your neighbor and have conversations with them and talk and reason together? Come, let us reason together. I think you can take the most radical left wing and the most radical right wing person in America, and they're going to agree on 90% of stuff. But, we allow the purveyors of division and hatred to take that 10% and just magnify it and make you think that it's the most important thing that ever happened in the
yep.
history of the world. And as a result of that, you got people who lived next to you for the last 20 years who were good neighbors. All of a sudden, you hate them because they got a different yard sign.
Right, right. It's crazy.
And it's really, I think, a matter of us allowing ourselves to be manipulated. But one of the things that's so important if we're going to right the ship, I think, is making sure that congressional staffers, White House staffers, judiciary staffers understand how the system works
Yep.
and how they can be a part of it in an effective way. And particularly when you look at the executive branch, there's 4 million employees.
Wow.
When a new president comes in, they get to change about 3,000 of them. So
Yep.
that's not very many. And and that's why it's so important that people start thinking about maybe becoming career employees.
Hmm.
And if you're a staffer, when you finish, uh, your political job, maybe go on with the knowledge that you have to apply for a career position. Ultimately, the only way you really solve that problem, I think, is you move a lot of federal agencies out of Washington, D.C.
Yep.
Because, the people who are careers are people who live in that area who tend to have the politics of that area. So if you got everybody on one side of the boat, eventually it's going to tip over and go down. And
Yep.
we need to have people on both sides of the boat uh, so that you can have a fair discussion. Because, as you know very well from your time in Washington, it's the staffers and those people who actually push legislation and various things through. And they also have the ability to slow things down and clog up the system. So you really need to have some balance there if you're going to be effective, I think. What do you think are some of the big barriers right now from keeping conservatives from entering
Yeah.
the political arena?
Yeah. Well, I think it's what you just got done saying. It's like I used to sit with 100 liberals every day at lunch. I taught college. So it was me versus 100. And we got along every day. We had fun, and they were kind of just old mainline liberals.
Right.
And there wasn't an issue, but the clogging piece right now, the real problem is, of course, money and power.
Mm.
That's the new, right? So the centralization of power in the executive branch, but also the money behind that, right? It's very efficient for a billionaire to just hire a lobbyist for $1 million, because if you get one line put in that budget, you're a permanent monopoly multimillionaire for life. So it's very efficient to do that. And then it's the clash of money and power that makes us mad at each other, right? And so I think you're exactly right. We got to move some of this out of the swamp, out of DC, decentralize stuff back to the states. And this project of and then the pressure on conservatives just comes from that because
Mm.
the left has an automatic uh, super advantage. All they need to do is say, "I want to give you more,"
Yes.
and then you're a conservative and you're like, "No, you got to eat your spinach." Well, which do you think is going to win at the ballot box, right? I'm going to give you more sugar, or no, you got to lift weights and eat your spinach, and that's a tough sell right now. Even with 50 trillion in debt, the conservatives you watch, they will not make that pitch coming up when they know they should. And the country, I think, might even reward them, but it's very hard. So we need young people to take over on your own behalf, out of
Yeah.
your own self interest. Get involved and take part in your government.
Absolutely. I just want to get your brief thoughts on ESG and its impact.
Yeah, well, it sounds benign, right? You have an interesting environment and social good deeds and good governance, corporate governance.
Right.
But it's interesting that the major firms engaged in this are have half their portfolios in China, who don't care much about the environment or social good deeds
Right.
or good corporate governance. So there's your hint. It has something to do with money and power again,
Right.
not with all those nice sounding acronyms.
Well, I've actually been sort of glad to see some of the CEOs and companies actually starting to stand up and push back
Yep.
against it.
Yep.
And it's not that I don't believe in corporate and social responsibility,
Right.
but that's something that should be determined by your board of directors
Yep.
and your company, not
Yep.
by outside forces who are putting pressure on you to conform
Right.
to whatever
Right.
the issue is that they see as important at that
Yep.
time.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
we're gonna keep pushing that thought
Right.
through the organization, and we'll be right back with Dr. David Brat for some closing remarks. And we're back with Common Sense, Dr. David Brat. David, you have a Master's of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary. How do you think our Judeo Christian heritage impacts our system of government today? And is our society being hurt by the fact that we're losing contact with that part of our history?
Yeah. If I had to trace it all to one thing, that's what I would emphasize. And I've spent my whole life engaged in that mission. I'm at Liberty University for a reason. Because that Judeo Christian heritage, of course, gave us Adam Smith, the founder of economics.
Hmm.
James Madison went to Princeton Seminary, where I went, roughly speaking, wrote the Constitution, and trained under Witherspoon, the Presbyterian president of the
Right.
school, and stuck around and took Hebrew. Well, why does that matter? Because if you read Genesis 3, you run into this thing called the fall of humankind into sin.
Mhm.
And that is what separates conservatives from liberals. The basic understanding of human nature is at the core. And Reinhold Niebuhr, of course, later in the tradition was very eloquent on that. But yeah, it's the core. And just to put it simply, my grandparents, your folks, your grandparents all had it so deep in them that they would sacrifice their entire lives. They would give up their happiness in order for their kid, right? That's kind of related to the Protestant work ethic, the long term horizon of building the kingdom of God. That's their project. They were building something way greater than themselves. They believed it. And if you believe in that source of power, it's a humbling source of power. And so, yeah, I believe in the Judeo Christian West. I'm a Christian personally. These days, there's all sorts of issues with preachers and drama and whatever. Just read the Bible. It's all sitting right there. Jesus was as clear and as can be. And I've run into a couple Christian therapists who've got a podcast called A Place to Be, and they got me reading the book. They said there's three types of people. There's the everyday sinner, and then there's the wicked, and then there's the evil. He said, read your red letter edition of Matthew, and whenever Jesus encounters somebody, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he had the exact response to the everyday sinner. He didn't, he loved them. And then the wicked, he had a different, and then the evil man, he knew what was going on. So it's not this soft, gushy, sugary stuff. Like Jesus and God the Father Almighty is my buddy. No, I think we need to get serious again. Read the book, and you'll see what's in the book. And
Absolutely.
that's the best test.
And it is a wonderful guide for one's life.
Yep.
It's the most widespread book in the history of the world, even though there
Yep.
have been many attempts to suppress it and to get rid of it.
Yep.
That should tell people something right
Yep.
there.
Exactly. Right.
And, and particularly, just in terms of how to live your life, you go someplace like the book of Proverbs, so much good stuff
Yeah.
there. It made a real difference for me because I started reading Proverbs as a teenager. And it was one of the things that made me realize that I was being a teenager, that I wasn't
Right.
listening to
Right.
people
Right.
and I
Right.
was acting like a fool. And it changed my behavior in a very
Yep.
big way. So God is there to guide us. But I just want to give you an opportunity for any parting thoughts that you might wish to give to our audience.
Yeah, that podcast is called "A Place We Find Ourselves." I think I said it wrong, but it's obvious you've read the Proverbs. I think Proverbs 1 is fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Everybody sees that in your face and it hears it in your words. And so I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to be with a wise man who fears God and has lived an exemplary life, morally, intellectually, spiritually, across the board.
Well,
And
thank
honored
you.
to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing for the kids at Liberty
Yep,
and
love them.
across the nation. It will bear tremendous fruit.
God bless.
We're going to take a short break, and I'm going to give you my prescription for this week. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have fascinating conversation with Dr. Dave Brat. And you can learn more about him at Brat Economics at Getter. I hope you also will take time to go to EBA, that's Executive Branch for America, at AmericanCornerstone.org. Find out more about Executive Branch for America. Get involved, take the course, get the certificate, learn about the inner workings of our government. And, let me know what you think about it. I'm always interested in hearing what you have to say. And also, you become a much better conversationalist when you get involved with your neighbors and your friends because you'll actually know what you're talking about. A lot of other people are just spouting opinions, and that doesn't get you very far these days. So thank you for being with us. Check it out. And that's it for this week. Please remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. Rate us, review us, tell your friends and neighbors. And because it's only through you that we will be able to make common sense common once again. And you want to contact me, it's Ben at AmericanCornerstone.org. And until next week, remember the cornerstones: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.